Dan Shapiro, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with Israel's intentions here. What exactly is the end game for Israel, and is it achievable?
Israel set out when it began this campaign to ensure that Iran would not be able to pursue the path of building a nuclear weapon, either because they can enrich the sufficient uranium to build a weapon, or that they can actually build the weapon itself, which is a separate process from the enrichment. There was a hope that that could be done through diplomatic negotiations, and that was what President Trump was pursuing. At the same time, Iran was dramatically shortening the distance until it would have that capability. So Israel set out to destroy various nuclear facilities. They have done significant damage to two of them in Natanz and Esfahan. A very important one remains, at least as far as we know, untouched. That's the deeply buried underground one at Fordo, where enrichment takes place. They've also tried to diminish and over time wear down the ballistic missile capability that Iran is using to attack Israel. Now, whether Israel can do all of that on its own is still an open question. It certainly has had impressive achievements in the first few days. It has air dominance. It has been able to hunt Iranian leaders, nuclear scientists, the missiles that are being shot at them. But this question of Fordow remains unknown if Israel has that capability. Usually that has been ascribed as something that can only be dealt with, at least through aerial bombing, by a U.S. munition and a U.S. bomber that Israel does not possess. Israel may have surprises. They've been very creative. They've shown a lot of ingenuity in this and other campaigns. So I don't rule out that they have other solutions, but that is a very still uncertain prospect.
Just on this question of how close Iran was to getting to weapons-grade uranium, we did have less than 3 months ago the US Director of National Intelligence saying that the assessment was Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. Then, of course, last week we had the UN watchdog, the IAEA, find that Iran was not complying with its obligations. Clearly, Israel felt the threat was imminent. In your view, how close was Iran to developing a nuclear weapon?
Too close for comfort. They, according to the IAEA, they have sufficient 60% enriched uranium, which again, it's a very short process if they so choose to enrich it to 90%, which is weapons grade, to produce 10 nuclear weapons. Now, there's a separate process to actually build a weapon. And that's something that they have clearly been doing research on, research that they have not disclosed, but through intelligence and through other means, it is known that they have significantly shortened the distance that it would take for them to actually build a weapon once they had the enriched uranium to 90%. So we could be talking a short number of weeks. We could be talking a very few number of months. In any case, it's not a risk that one can take with a country that has declared itself dedicated to Israel's destruction, that has spent decades arming and training and financing terrorist organizations, which have been carrying out their campaign against Israel and against the United States and against many others. The idea that that regime would be that close to achieving a nuclear weapon and potentially putting it in the hands of others is simply a risk that can't be taken.
But the US was, of course, still engaged in talks with Iran over that nuclear program. Do you think Israel was worried that that could lead to a situation that still allowed Iran to have some nuclear enrichment capacity?
Yes, it would have been preferable to achieve the desirable end state of Iran completely ending its enrichment capability, opening its program up to full inspections anytime, anywhere, and to do that through diplomacy. And that, I think, is what President Trump was setting out to do. Iran, in all of those talks, had said consistently, a long-standing position of theirs, that they would never give up the right to enrich uranium. And at the same time that they were conducting the talks, they were shortening the distance that it would be for them to break out and actually achieve this very dangerous capability. So I think it's a fair question whether Israel might have given the American-led talks a bit more time to try to succeed. But those talks, at least at the time that they broke down, hadn't produced the kind of breakthrough of ensuring Iran would actually give up this capability that is really necessary.
I want to look at Iran's capability now. After your 6 years as US ambassador to Israel, you worked at the State Department, really looking at how a war between Israel and Iran might play out. What capacity does Iran now have? Clearly, it's been seriously weakened given what's happened. What can it do? And in your judgment, what will it do?
Well, already in these first 4 days or so of the war, they have launched numerous barrages. I think there was one just a short time ago, of ballistic missiles against Israel. Of course, let's not forget this war didn't really begin last week. Last year, Iran, on two different occasions, for the first time, not through proxies, but in a direct state-on-state attack against Israel, launched barrages of ballistic missiles and other weapons against Israel. So this is now something they're doing multiple times a day, or at least nightly. And they have enough of those ballistic missiles to probably continue that for several more days, maybe even a few more weeks. And they may even have their heaviest, most dangerous of those ballistic missiles still in reserve. Israel's, of course, trying to destroy them on the ground before they're launched, trying to intercept them once they are launched.
But we're talking about days or weeks of supply for these missiles.
Yeah.
Then what?
Yeah, so Israel is trying to limit their effectiveness through interceptions and limit them on the ground. Beyond that, Iran, of course, has terrorist organizations, even though some of them are weakened, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, that is long sponsored, that it could activate to conduct attacks. They have threatened, of course, if the United States gets involved or if they assess Gulf countries are involved, that they would attack American bases in the Gulf or energy installations or shut down shipments of energy through the Strait of Hormuz. They have sufficient shorter range ballistic missiles and many other weapons to do that.
But you think they would only do that in response to a US involvement, or would they be the first to actually strike a US base or some other US facility in the region?
I think in the near term, they're not likely to do it unless the United States gets involved. They don't want the United States involved, in part because the United States has a unique capability to do devastating damage to that Fordo enrichment facility. But that is really the nub of this question. Will Iran, by the end of this, however it ends, through a capitulation or through a negotiation or through a successful American or Israeli strike, will they still retain that capability that in a short time would allow them to produce the material for nuclear weapons? They've got the knowledge, that's clear. And that is really the question that both the United States and Israel have to grapple with. How this ends, whenever this ends, will Iran retain that capability? To this moment, they probably still have it.
What's the answer to this big question in your mind? Will Iran now sprint towards a nuclear warhead?
There's a risk of that. That is definitely one possibility, that they will try to take this material to a secret location, that they will try either at Fordo or somewhere else to do this very quick enrichment to weapons grade, maybe even conduct a nuclear test, demonstrate that they are now a nuclear weapon state. They've been just short of that by their choice, a nuclear threshold state, but it is possible that they will try to break out in that sprint at this moment. That's why time is really of the essence for both Israel and the United States to figure out how to ensure, whether it's through military strikes or whether it's through bringing Iran back to the negotiating table in a somewhat weakened state, that we achieve that objective, that they do not have that capability.
Let's turn to the role of the United States here. It has been widely reported that Benjamin Netanyahu presented a plan to Donald Trump that involved assassinating Iran's supreme leader, and that Donald Trump said no. What does that tell us about the US president's red lines here?
I can't be sure if that report is accurate or not, but I've seen that report. It's certainly plausible. Look, there is a strong international taboo against assassinating national leaders of foreign governments. There is no question that the supreme leader of Iran has an enormous amount of Israeli and American and Arab and many other countries' blood on his hands, all terrorist attacks that have been conducted across the region and across the world by his direction. So it will not be a sad day when he leaves the scene, but it's understandable if the president of the United States would say, let's not break that taboo. And it may not make that much difference to the actual outcome that is being pursued, which is to ensure that Iran doesn't have that nuclear capability. That won't rise and fall on whether that supreme leader is still in power.
This has now become a big test for Donald Trump. He says Iran and Israel should make a deal and will make a deal. But then he goes on to say, sometimes they have to fight it out. We're going to see what happens. Is it clear to you whether Donald Trump will allow this conflict to continue escalating? And is it clear whether he does have any solutions?
It's not clear. I think he went into the negotiations originally without a clear picture of what he was trying to achieve. There were several weeks when American officials gave contradictory statements almost every day about what the requirement was, if it included an actual end to Iranian enrichment or if there was some way Iran could continue to enrich in a supervised fashion. Eventually, I think he landed on the position that Iran really has to not have that capability. If it does, it essentially can produce a nuclear weapon at a time of its choosing. So now, of course, that Israel has launched this campaign, that goal remains very important. And he's not wrong that it's possible that Iran might say, look, we're taking so many hits and so many blows and so much damage that we need to come back to the negotiating table and show more flexibility on that question than we ever have in the past. But we don't know. And so if the president is committed to that outcome, it would probably be a mistake to bring this conflict to a premature conclusion before either achieving it militarily or having a pretty good picture that Iran is prepared to make that concession in diplomacy.
Well, I mean, if you were still in a position of wargaming these very scenarios, what would your advice be to a US president right now?
My advice would be to continue to support Israel in defending itself. Of course, there are still rockets and missiles raining on Israel almost on a nightly basis, and they've done significant damage. There have been casualties there. It would be to hold to that principle that Iran cannot have the ability and the capacity to produce nuclear weapons, because we know that they aspire to that, that they would at least be able to hold that over the world and the region and threaten it and perhaps put it in the hands of terrorist organizations, that's too dangerous. And so in supporting Israel in this conflict, it may also mean taking a look at the question of if the United States would participate at some point to achieve objectives that Israel may not have the military capability to do, particularly related to that Fordo capacity, that Fordo facility, excuse me. So I think that has to be on the table, and I think it is on the table. I think there are really quite different views, maybe even divided views within the Trump administration, and these are tough calls for any president.
But your advice would be for the US to seriously consider taking out that Fordo facility.
It would, because the Fordo facility, if it survives and continues to be a facility where they can enrich at 60%, and when they choose to sprint to 90%, this campaign will not have achieved its objective. They will remain capable and maybe even more motivated to produce a nuclear weapon at any time of their choosing.
Dan Shapiro, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.